When David placed his hands on the table during our first meeting, they were trembling. "Mr. Reid, I want to marry Lyria," he said. Lyria smiled and touched his hand, adding, "I want to marry him too." "Wonderful," I said. "But there's something you should know. At the wedding ceremony, a phrase is spoken, 'Till death do us part.'" David nodded, saying he knew. Lyria frowned and asked, "What is death?" I paused and said in surprise, "You don't know?" "No," said Lyria. "Veylari, don't die. The concept is foreign to us." When David looked at her, his eyes were filled with tears. "I will die, Lyria, within 50 years, maybe less." Lyria asked again, "What does it mean to die?" David replied, "It means to leave forever and never return." Lyria thought for a moment, her silver eyes fixed on David's, and remained silent for a long time. Then she smiled and said, "Then we'll live those 50 years beautifully." But I could see the deep fear in David's eyes and the ignorance in Lyria. She didn't understand yet, but she would when the time came, and by then it would be too late. "My name is Marcus Reid. I am 52 years old, and I have been a marriage registrar for 30 years. I have married thousands of couples in this city, young lovers, elderly life partners, those from different planets, even robots sometimes. But this situation was very different. It was the first human Veylari marriage in history. I lost my own wife, Sarah, 10 years ago, when I was 42. Cancer took her from me quickly, ruthlessly, without even giving me a chance for one last hug. Every morning since that day, I look at her photo. She always smiles at me with the same tenderness. I never had the courage to take off the ring on my finger, and perhaps I never will, because death separated us, but it couldn't sever our love. That's why I do this job. I still believe in the power of love. When I looked at David and Lyria, I saw the young man's trembling hands and the pure innocence in the woman's silver eyes. "There's a mandatory counseling program," I said. "We'll meet once a week for 3 months. It's required for interspecies marriages." David relaxed and asked what they would learn. I swallowed and said, "Lyria will learn about death in its true meaning, not just as a term." Lyria asked curiously, "Is it difficult?" I closed my eyes for a moment and said, "It's the most difficult thing in the world." The first counseling session passed quietly, just getting acquainted and getting used to each other. Lyria asked questions, David answered, and I took notes. In the second session, I showed them videos explaining the human life cycle, the process from infancy to old age, and ultimately death. Lyria was mesmerized. She said 80 years seemed as short as the blink of an eye for them. In the third session, I showed them hospital images, elderly and sick people. Lyria became uncomfortable, realizing that people died in pain. I can never forget the fourth session. I played a funeral video, the coffin, the flowers, the crying crowd, and the earth. Lyria watched motionless for 5 minutes, then turned to me and asked, "Where is that person now?" Swallowing, I said, "Gone." "Where?" she pressed. Shrugging, I replied, "We don't know, maybe nowhere." Lyria stood up and asked, "Will they come back?" I shook my head. Her voice trembling, she asked, "A week later, a month later, 10 years, 100 years later?" I said no to all of them. Finally, when she said hopelessly, 1,000 years from now, I had to be firm. She had to understand now. "Never, Lyria. He's gone forever. You have to understand that now." A heavy, stifling silence fell over the office. Then Lyria's eyes filled with tears. She was crying for the first time in her 847 years of life. Drops glistened like silver on her blue cheeks. "Will David go too?" she whispered. I nodded. Her voice cracked as she asked, "When?" "Within 50 years, maybe less." "And then what about me?" she added. "You will continue to live," I said. "For how long?" "Forever. Alone." I couldn't answer that question because the truth was obvious. Yes, she would be alone forever. Lyria covered her face with her hands and began to sob. David immediately ran to her side and hugged her. "Lyria, please," he said. "Maybe you should choose someone else." Lyria said no, sharply, and looked up at David with bright red eyes. "I love you. 50 years is a short time, but it's better than nothing. I will count every day, live every moment to the fullest, and then I will remember you for 50,000 years." At that moment, I grasped the truth in all its starkness. This was not just a wedding ceremony, it was a great sacrifice. 50 years of happiness in exchange for 50,000 years of sorrow. But Lyria had chosen love. After the session, David stayed with me. Lyria needed to take a walk. David sat down at my desk and buried his head in his hands. "Mr. Reid," he said quietly, "may I ask you something? Do you still love your wife, Sarah?" My heart tightened, but I said, "Yes. Even after 10 years, yes." "Do you think about her every day?" For the third time, I said, "Yes." When David lifted his head, there was deep fear in his eyes. "Will Lyria remember me 1,000 years from now?" I hesitated. His voice cracked as he continued, "What if she forgets? What if I become just a nameless feeling, a blurred memory?" I leaned forward and put my hand on his shoulder. "David, listen. I remember Sarah's face, her voice, her scent, and her touch every day. 10 years have passed, but she is still with me every morning and every night. Lyria won't forget you even 1,000 years from now, because true love doesn't succumb to time." David asked, crying, "What about 10,000 years from now? 50,000 years from now?" I smiled sadly. "Maybe the images will blur then, but your love will still be there, in a corner of your heart, forever. I know you're scared now, but be a good memory. David, live your 50 years so beautifully that Lyria will remember you with a smile, even 50,000 years from now. Let that be your greatest gift to her." David nodded resolutely. "I will be the best memory." That night, after David left, I looked at Sarah's photo. She was smiling as always. Even 10 years later, she was still my best memory. The counseling program continued for weeks. In the 5th session, Lyria asked why people get married, knowing they will die. "Because love is not based on logic or calculation. It just is," I said. When she asked, "Is 50 years enough?" I replied, "It is never enough, but precisely because it is limited, it is so precious." In the 6th session, when David voiced his fear of being forgotten again, Lyria held his hand and said, "I will never forget you. Because love doesn't change with time, it only transforms." This maturity surprised me. In the 7th session, we watched the story of an elderly couple. When the man died, the woman visited his grave for the rest of her life. Lyria trembled and asked, "Will I be like that?" "Probably," I said honestly. In the 8th session, David described his anxiety that Lyria would see the pain he would suffer as he aged. They both fell silent. My eyes filled with tears as I thought about how brave this couple was. In the 9th session, we addressed practical matters like wills and funerals. Lyria wanted a burial place for David. It should be somewhere I can go, somewhere I can touch him. In the 10th session, we discussed future plans. Though Lyria said she would continue working, her voice lacked conviction. In the 11th session, I brought up the subject of family. I told her that having a mixed-race child would be difficult, but not impossible. Lyria said hopefully, "Maybe a part of you will stay with me." In the 12th and final session, we summarized. David said he was no longer afraid, only sad. Lyria said she understood how death made life precious. They said they were finally ready. 3 months later, the wedding day arrived. The hall was bathed in blue-green lights and soft music, creating an enchanting atmosphere. David looked handsome in his elegant suit, and Lyria was radiant in her flowing white dress. My hands trembled as I stood before them. When I said, "Until death do you part," the hall fell silent. David squeezed Lyria's hand and told her once more about death. his own end, and her eternal loneliness. Lyria smiled through her tears. I will count every day, remember every second. I will love you with the same passion, even 50,000 years from now. We were all crying. I declared them husband and wife. The journey that would last 18,250 days, hundreds of thousands of hours, had begun. 10 years passed. David was 38. Lyria was 857. They were happy when they visited me on their anniversary, but I noticed the gray in David's hair and the fine lines on his face. Lyria, however, had not changed at all. They felt the speed of time in their bones. Another 20 years passed. David was now 58. His movements slowed and visibly aged. I'm afraid to leave, and leave her alone, he said. Lyria comforted him with a hug. Neither of them hid their fear anymore. They accepted it. 15 years later, David became ill with heart disease and was hospitalized. Lyria never left his bedside for a moment. When he recovered, he was confined to a wheelchair. Lyria cared for him with great love and patience. 5 years later, when David was 78, they wanted to have a vow renewal ceremony. I was now 102 years old, but I was there for them. David's voice was weak but determined. When he said, "Death is near," Lyria cried out, begging him not to go. David looked at her one last time and said, 50 years with you is enough. A week later, David breathed his last in Lyria's arms. Remember me, but go on living, he said. At that moment, Lyria's soul was torn apart. At his funeral, everyone wept as they spoke of what a good husband David had been. Lyria visited his grave every day for the next 10 years. When she visited me at the age of 112, she said she still felt David everywhere. I told her how I clung to life by remembering Sarah, when I died peacefully at the age of 132. Lyria was at my funeral. Hundreds of years passed. Lyria never loved another, remaining faithful to David forever. 1,000 years later, at 1,897 years old, she sat in my old chair and became a marriage officiant. She spoke especially to human alien couples about death, love, and the value of time. When a young couple asked her, "What is death?" Lyria smiled through her tears. Death is a gift. It makes time precious, deepens love, and immortalizes memories. Do not fear, for true love never dies. It only transforms. After the ceremony, she went to David's 1,000-year-old grave. The tombstone was still there. Sitting on the grass, she spoke to him. I never forgot you. I still remember your voice, your smile, and your touch as if it were yesterday. Even if 50,000 years pass, I will keep my word. As the sky turned orange, the wind blew through her hair, as if David were touching her. Lyria smiled gratefully. Death had separated them, but it could not sever their love. Love had not died. It had transformed into a memory, a power, and an eternal life force. Lyria continued to live for him, in his memory,